Robert Prevost. Who is the new Pope? And his story will make you speechless. In the quiet corners of Peru, where dusty roads wind through humble towns, a young American priest once walked among the poor, carrying nothing but his faith, a kind smile, and a deep sense of purpose. His name was Robert Francis Prevost. Today, that same man, once unknown to the world, has become the new Pope, sending waves of surprise, hope, and admiration through the global Catholic community. But who is Robert Prevost? Why is his story so powerful, and why are people calling his rise to the papacy nothing short of miraculous? This is the emotional, deeply human journey of a man whose heart beat with the struggles of others, who quietly transformed lives before the world even knew his name. And now, as he steps into the highest role in the Catholic Church, millions are asking, how did he get here? A humble beginning in Chicago. Robert Prevost was born on September 14, 1955, in Chicago, Illinois, into a working-class family with deep Catholic roots. His parents, of French-Canadian descent, were devout and hardworking. His mother taught him compassion and prayer. His father taught him discipline and humility. From a young age, Robert loved the church, not just its teachings, but its people. He was the kind of child who paid attention during Mass, who stayed after to help clean up candles, who asked deep questions about God even before he turned 10. No one imagined then that this quiet boy would one day wear the white robe of the papacy, not even Robert himself. At 14, something stirred in his soul. While other boys dreamed of baseball and bikes, Robert felt a powerful calling to serve, not for power or status, but for love. He entered the seminary young, and the rest of his life would be shaped by this decision. A missionary with a heart for the forgotten. What makes Robert Prevost so different from many of his predecessors is what he chose to do after becoming a priest. Instead of staying in the comfort of his home country, he answered a call that few dare to follow, to serve in one of the poorest regions of the world. In 1985, Father Robert left for Peru. The conditions were harsh: poverty, political unrest, and violence. The area was plagued by guerrilla warfare. Many priests had already left, fearing for their lives, but Robert stayed. He didn't come as a savior, he came as a brother. He walked for hours to remote villages, celebrated Mass on cracked tables, and held hands with people who had never seen a priest up close. He learned Spanish fluently and later spoke perfect Quechua, the language of the indigenous people. He sat with grieving mothers, blessed dying children, and built trust in a place where trust was rare. Locals still remember him as Padre Roberto, the priest who never said no. Struggles that shaped a saint, but Robert's journey wasn't easy. He struggled with illness, once nearly dying from a fever caught deep in the jungle. He faced loneliness, cultural barriers, and the heavy burden of trying to bring light into such deep suffering. At one point, he considered leaving. The pain was too much. But during a silent retreat, he had a moment of clarity that would change everything. "I realized that I wasn't there to fix people," he later said. "I was there to love them, fully, without judgment." It was a spiritual awakening. From that point on, he no longer saw his work as a mission, but as a partnership with God's people. This shift, this humble transformation, became the cornerstone of his life and leadership, rising through the church quietly and powerfully. Unlike many who climb church ranks through Vatican politics, Robert was never ambitious for power. In fact, he tried to avoid leadership positions. But his deep wisdom, his ability to listen, and his genuine love for people made him impossible to ignore. In 1999, he was elected as Prior General of the Augustinians, a global order within the church. It was a huge role, but Robert didn't change. He still traveled often to the poorest places, still greeted janitors and cooks with the same respect he gave to bishops. In 2014, Pope Francis, who had heard of Prevost's work, appointed him Bishop of Chiclayo in northern Peru. Even then, Robert kept things simple. He rode public buses. He lived modestly. He took confessions for hours. In 2023, he was called to Rome as prefect of the Dicastery for Bishops, one of the highest offices in the Vatican. Many insiders believe this was the final step before something bigger. A surprising choice: a pope for the people. When the Conclave began to elect a new pope in 2025, few expected Robert Prevost to be chosen. He wasn't Italian. He wasn't part of the inner circle, but maybe that's why he was chosen. The church needed something new. They saw in Prevost a man who had walked with the poor, who had healed the wounded, who had led not with command, but with compassion. When white smoke rose over the Sistine Chapel and the name Robertus Franciscus Prevost was announced, the world paused. Who? And then they saw him, standing in white, tears in his eyes, hands over his heart. A humble missionary from Chicago, now Pope Robert I. What makes his papacy so unique? Pope Robert I brings with him a rare combination of qualities: fluency in multiple languages, including Spanish, Italian, Quechua, and French, making him a true global shepherd. Deep experience with the poor and marginalized, not in theory, but in daily life for decades. An open heart to reform. Insiders say he may continue Pope Francis's mission to bring more transparency, compassion, and inclusion to the Church. A spiritual anchor, he is known to spend hours in silent prayer, even before major decisions. But perhaps what makes him most extraordinary is his humility. He refuses to live in lavish apartments. He wears an old wooden cross instead of gold. He still writes handwritten letters to people in Peru. And here's a surprising fact. When he was elected, he requested that his favorite painting, a simple image of Jesus washing the feet of a poor man, be placed in the papal office. Unexpected but undeniable, the day he became pope. When the Conclave of 2025 began, many experts predicted someone from Europe or Africa would become pope. Robert Prevost was barely mentioned. But inside the Sistine Chapel, cardinals were thinking differently. They remembered Robert's quiet strength, his decades with the poor, his openness to change, and his deep spirituality. On the third day of voting, the decision was made. He stepped out onto the balcony, tears running down his face. He looked overwhelmed, not by power, but by the weight of love and responsibility. A voice for the forgotten. Since becoming pope, Robert has already made it clear what his mission will be: to heal, to listen, and to serve. In one of his first speeches, he said, "The Church is not a palace for the perfect, it is a home for the hurting. We must open our arms wider, not close our doors tighter." He has called for renewed focus on indigenous rights, climate change, child protection in the Church, the role of women in leadership, greater inclusion for those who feel rejected by religion, a future full of hope. For millions, he is not just a leader. He is a symbol of what is possible when faith and humility work together. His life story reminds us that greatness does not always wear gold or speak from balconies. Sometimes, greatness walks barefoot through jungle paths, listens more than it talks, and weeps with the suffering instead of hiding from them. Robert Prevost's rise to the papacy is not just surprising, it's deeply inspiring. His journey speaks to anyone who has ever felt unseen, who has ever struggled quietly, who has ever believed that love can change the world. And as he leads the Catholic Church into a new chapter, one thing is clear. This pope may not come with fanfare, but his quiet strength may just move mountains. Final reflection. In an age where trust is broken, institutions are questioned, and people long for something real, Pope Robert stands as a beacon. Not perfect, but faithful. Not powerful in the traditional sense, but deeply powerful in spirit. His story reminds us that sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones who never asked to be seen. They just kept loving, serving, and believing.